We go through the slides, our goals and objectives. A primary focus for our meeting tonight is talking about the interchange location itself and how we came to focus on where an interchange is necessary and why did we pick this particular location. It starts with various planning studies. Regional planning studies, such as the Hidden Valley Transportation Framework Study, looks at general improvements in the area. The Pinal County Regionally Significant Routes Study is another study that's done by the county that looks at major improvements to the roads and streets. These documents are developed in conjunction with all the agencies, so Casa Grande, Maricopa, all the different communities are participating in how these planning documents are developed as to where the ultimate infrastructure will be located throughout the community. Other studies that we've worked on include improvements. Some of you may have been involved with some of our planning meetings for the east-west corridor. It's a parkway that's going to be located a little bit further to the north along Val Vista through most of Casa Grande and then ties into Maricopa. All of these documents provide us with some traffic modeling and traffic background that gives us the traffic numbers for how we're going to be looking at what kind of improvements are going to be necessary for the foreseeable future. The goals and objectives of this study is simply to make linkages between the east and the west sides of I-10 through the city of Casa Grande to provide an uncongested local alternative to Florence Boulevard as Florence continues to have more traffic, more development, more delays. So this becomes a great alternative to that particular street. Improved access to central Pinal County. Kortsen would become one of the major arterials that would continue to provide access to the east and to the development and growth of Pinal County. And then we're not only looking at highway improvements, but multimodal improvements as well, making provisions for sidewalks, making provisions for bicycle lanes, making certain that those other provisions are incorporated into the ultimate plans as well. The map that we have on the screen, similar to the boards that you've seen on the side, if I were to lay it out, we have Florence on the bottom. Kortsen is located just above the brown box. We have the Promenade Mall here. This is some proposed improvements already being considered along the I-10 corridor that end just north at Kortsen. Let's get some lines on there. There's I-10, there's Kortsen itself. Our focus is the improvements about a mile on either side of I-10 and what type of interchange facility, what kind of access would be provided at the interchange at Kortsen. And so that's the focus of what we're looking for and what we're here to present. We've been following a process. That process is a federal process that helps us gather information from communities. We start with preliminary data collection, and that data collection is just to simply take existing studies, existing plans from the cities, the counties, the communities as to what's being proposed for improvements, tie that into a traffic model, making that traffic model see what would the future look like, how would the traffic operate not only today, but in 10 years, 20 years, and beyond as to when that need will be necessary. We're developing an environmental overview document. We're developing actually something that will be described a little bit further, a planning and environmental linkages document that allows us to basically look at some of the environmental elements now and that can be used in the ultimate decision as to when these improvements are built into the future. All of that preliminary information is used to help us come up with some draft alternatives. We came to the community in the past through some of these similar meetings, asked for feedback from the community, from the agencies, as to where these alignments should be located through public scoping. Through that scoping process, we get your comments. We've refined these alternatives, and what we're going to be showing you tonight is what basically the recommendation is for this particular intersection location. When we're done with the process, this study that we're looking at right now, when we pick the location and we pick the type of interchange, there's still several things that are left to do. The final engineering The final design has to still be completed. The final environmental clearance document would still have to be completed. One of the things that requires is to have a funding source to say this is how we're going to pay for those particular improvements. At this time, there's no identified funding source for these improvements. The city is being proactive in starting this study to say we need to have a plan to make certain that we have provisions for this interchange in the future. And with this plan in place and with consensus on the improvements, we're hopeful that the city can also take this plan and go to other funding opportunities to find a way to find money to build the actual project. And that's one of the goals of this study as well, is to look for grants, look for other opportunities to find funding so that once this study is complete, we can find a means to hopefully get some construction dollars and make it a reality. Ultimately, that's when the construction will start. So the biggest question we usually have on some of these meetings is, well, can you tell me when we're going to start seeing dirt moved? The answer for right now is no. You did the perfect shrug back there. That's the answer that we have to give you. But we're hopeful that with this type of a solution, with this planning, that we can move this concept forward and find a funding source, okay? In terms of how the changes are occurring, many of you are familiar with this, but the change in population, certainly there was a lot more growth a few years ago, and that slowed down, but it's still continuing. You know, from 2010 to 2040, even with the slower curve, we're still seeing for 2040 having a population of nearly 20,000 people, 130% increase. We have to make provisions for that, and our traffic models are those consistent with the rest of the planning going on in the county and in the city to make certain it's consistent with the type of growth that we're seeing. And those models are constantly being adjusted. This is the current growth projections that we're seeing. Estimated employment is projected to grow, continue to grow. That employment would be occurring on both sides of the freeway. And so that's one of the major reasons for having some of these access points, additional access points for I-10. An increase of 250% on the employment. Congestion, levels of congestion. If we were to look at what the traffic conditions look like today, it's a working network of streets. You can't say that it's heavily congested today, but as that growth continues, those streets will become more burdened, and that's what we're trying to make the provisions for. We tend to look at that when it's, you know, low, medium, high. We design our facilities for about 20 to 25 years into the future. That's why we try and set the goal for how these new improvements will be going. So that's why you're going to hear me use the year 2040 a lot in this presentation. That's our goal. That's what we're trying to shoot for in terms of what we're trying to make these facilities fit. The 2040 level of congestion on the map that's proposed is if we do no changes to the existing infrastructure and just keep it with the existing streets, most of the streets get a red line or a red mark. And you'll see there's no crossing on this map at Kortsen, okay? If that, this is the condition, if you will, that if everything just simply stays where it is today, it's just more traffic would occur, okay? And so we come to a condition where it's a high congestion level, and that's why we start to look at other opportunities, other improvements. If we were to build the improvements at Kortsen, you see all of a sudden with that same future level of traffic, all the lines all of a sudden become green. And it's because everything it's allowed to balance. It's not coming with a great big spot in the middle where you can't have access to, so that everybody has to go around. So it provides a lot of opportunities, not only for direct access to and from the freeway, but to cross the freeway. And that's one of the big goals of this project, is to give that access to both sides of I-10. One of the elements we've included is an environmental overview. And I'm going to let Beth describe the environmental improvements.
We had a public meeting here in July, and we went through the environmental in a fair amount of detail, so we've really kind of condensed that for tonight. We did prepare an environmental overview. If you're interested in taking a look at that, it is available on the website, which is identified here, and it's also in some of the meeting materials that you have tonight. This was largely a review of existing information through literature. There was a little bit of field work done, but it was fairly minimal, so it was mostly based on what's readily available. And all of this contributes to that decision-making process. This provides kind of a laundry list of some of the resources that we look at. We look at natural resources such as biological issues, whether there's any protected species, there's any water. We look at cultural resources, historic sites, archaeological sites, and we also look at natural resources, or excuse me, the human environment, which would include things like your land use and are there any protected populations. And this just kind of rounds out the list of some of the things that we looked at. A lot of this area is designated farmland. It may not be used in farmland today, but it still is prime or unique farmland. We looked at hazardous material and even recreation areas, and there are some trails and planned trails in the area. If you have any questions, we do have a board on the environmental sensitivities, and I'd be happy to go over any questions that you have after this presentation. Berwin?
Thank you, Beth. Okay, so we mentioned that a lot of our attention is really focused on what type of interchange you're going to be constructing. One of the things that we had to go through with this process is we had to make certain that we considered all viable alternatives. And some of these alternatives you're going to say, well, gee, that just doesn't make any sense. Well, we thought of them, we wrote them down, we said we considered them, and they don't make sense. So we just checked them off the box and we kind of move forward. As we get down to some of the smaller alternatives or the more preferred, more viable ones, then you start having to do a little bit more work. For those, we looked at overall about 9 different concepts, and all of you have a driver's license, so you're all traffic engineers, and you all know how to drive the various different types of interchanges. And you all have your pros and cons as to how they work. The concepts that we eliminated diagrammatically, they're shown on the bottom of the screen. We looked at interchanges with roundabouts at the terminus of the ramps. Doesn't fair when you start shaking your heads no back there, okay? We've already gotten rid of this one, that's okay. But you know, they have their place. It's just that it doesn't work for this particular intersection. In particular, since we have so much east-west traffic that wants to cross I-10, okay? We've looked at interchanges with ramps. Federal Highways is trying to get away from ramps because that's usually where you see the people turned over on the side because they went too fast through the ramps. But they have their place. We looked at putting frontage roads between McCartney and Florence and looking at not putting another interchange or just simply accommodating it with additional frontage roads. And we looked at loops and ramps that bypass or go over. Now, granted, there'll be a lot of left-turning movements, but we don't have to have a system interchange. We don't need to have separated ramps. So those are all being eliminated as general concepts. The 4 that we narrowed it down to are ones that you're likely familiar with and one that you're perhaps not familiar with, but we did consider. The standard diamond or the spread diamond, that's a prevalent type of interchange used throughout the state. It's common, everybody knows how to drive it. The difference simply between the two is as we bring the ramps in, the bridge it's the same length of bridge to cross the freeway, but if we want to keep our right-of-way impact to the sides to the left to a smaller amount, we have to build the ramps on taller walls or a taller profile. So we introduce a little bit more structure, a little bit more cost. Okay, if we spread it out, it's a bigger interchange, but we have a bigger right-of-way footprint. So it has a little bit more cost with acquiring that land for the interchange. But they both operate fairly well and fairly similarly. So, but the spread diamond just simply has more right-of-way component. If we look at the promenade where Florence crosses, it actually has somewhat of a spread crossing to the east and a more compressed crossing because of the drainage channel on the west side. So that's a little bit of both. So it's a great example. But the crossing over the highway is comparable to a lot of interchanges you're used to seeing, and that's what we're looking at proposing. Other types that we considered is called a single point urban. These are a lot, like the name implies, an urban interchange. If you're used to driving I-10 around 7th Avenue or 7th Street in Phoenix, a lot of the ones on 51 are these what we call SPUIs, single point urbans. And so that type of an urban interchange looks like this. In an urban environment, your freeway is pretty narrow, and so to build this huge concrete mass over the top of the freeway, it's a cost-appropriate solution because you're already in an urban, expensive right-of-way. It's more expensive to build it wide, so you just kind of build your infrastructure over the freeway, okay? In our particular location, we've got a divided rural freeway. And although it's a 6-lane freeway today, we have to make provisions for a 10-lane freeway in the future, 5 lanes in each direction. I want to make certain I make that clear. It's not 10 lanes in each direction, okay? It's 5 lanes in each direction. So they're going to add 2 more lanes eventually, okay? But not right away. But we have to make the provisions for our bridges because we don't want to build a brand new bridge and then have that bridge have to be expanded in the future. So we make provisions for that with these improvements. So great idea, works great for left turns, just real expensive to build. And then there's a new concept that's coming across the United States. It's being used a lot in rural areas. Utah is building several of these, and I saw some in Branson, I saw some other places. It's a different kind of concept called a diverging diamond. And the neat thing about a diverging diamond is there are no left turn lanes on it. You make the left turn lanes after the bridge. So if it looks a little silly, it's just you've not perhaps seen one of these, but normally you'd be coming to the interchange and you would be on the right-hand side of the interchange. So you come from this direction and you're on the right-hand side of the interchange. As you go through the interchange, you swap to the other side, you shift to the other side of the interchange. Now what that does is there's no longer a need to have a left turn lane in the median. You now can make a left turn straight onto the ramp. And your right turn is made straight onto the ramp. So there's no reason to have a left turn lane in the middle of the bridge. Okay? What that saves is the cost of the width of the bridge to have that extra lane. What you pay for is some of you that can't handle change and a little bit of confusion occurs at the interchange. And then also, as it turns out, for us on this particular location with Kortsen, we have an awful lot of traffic that just simply wants to cross the freeway. And so it really slows that traffic down. So while the benefits to this particular bridge is it's a shorter bridge, it's a narrower bridge, it does require more right-of-way on the approaches, so it has a bigger footprint to accomplish these ramps, and it really doesn't handle our traffic in the long run as good as some of the more traditional approaches. Okay? But you can see we tried to consider every viable alternative and went through and looked at these in the different concepts. So as it comes down to, what we're recommending is a pretty standard interchange by Arizona standards, the compressed diamond with 2 left turn lanes. That's what the ultimate footprint we're recommending is going to be provided for. We believe that initially a single left turn lane and just 2 through lanes in each direction would be all that was constructed initially, and that'll last for a good 20 years. And then in the future, that could easily be expanded to provide the additional lanes as we need to grow. Again, just the standard diamond that you see up on the screen there. This one just has symmetrical ramps. The Arizona channel that happens on Florence doesn't actually impact us as much at this location because the channel actually starts to come off to the side. You can see that on some of our maps. So it doesn't really impact us. One of the only challenges that we're still trying to figure out is as part of the infrastructure and the improvements planned for Kortsen Road is your local trails that cross through the area. And there's a local trail path that parallels I-10 on the west side of the freeway. And so one of the things we're still trying to look at is how do we efficiently get that trail to cross Kortsen when Kortsen has to cross over the freeway. So do we have one of those trails where we just simply bring the access up to the top and make the crossing at the signals? Or do we consider putting in a box culvert and allowing the trail to continue at grade and go underneath? Both are good solutions. Those are some things that we still have to work out, and we'll be working with you on those. So the Crossroad itself, standard arterial and being consistent with other streets proposed in Casa Grande, going with that same plan. We're showing a 6-lane section as to what it would ultimately be, but it would likely only have a 4-lane facility constructed at first. What's being proposed is that we typically build on these types of improvements now. We build the outside lanes first, so we don't have to change the disturbance to the landscape and the access points as the development's completed. When we need to have more lanes, we just simply build to the middle and add the additional lanes and take care of it in that location. So that's the type of street. If you were to say, gee, what does that look like? Approximately like the two modeled simulations that we have on the page here. This is looking from the east towards I-10, and so yeah, it's pretty flat. It's pretty much your basic arterial street. There's not much infrastructure there to compare it to right now. So the access points are similar to what you would find on most of the other streets, what you would expect in terms of tying into an arterial. This is looking from, if you're familiar with how Hennis comes up, this is I forgot the name of the subdivision. Everybody else knows it. Okay, so we have I-10 up at the top. Palm Creek, thank you. Okay, so this is at the tie-in there. You can actually see the Arizona channel coming through right here, comes up, and then it continues on its merry way. That channel is being proposed to be relocated further to the south and then crossing through here. So this is just a concept to show what that 6-lane facility would look like, but basically it's on the middle of the section line, a straight extension of the other arterials that are from either side. So we mentioned before where we are in the process overview. Just want to, when you get through and you see these pictures and you say, well, gee, we have a plan, we have a concept, simply it's going to be real easy to go from this point and go to construction. The next big challenge that we have is to find a means of a funding source. And once that funding source is found, then we can work to get the final plans, the final environmental document, and put the rest of the improvements together. That being said, when this study is finished with this document, you'll see the necessary improvements. There's a cost, the environmental consequences or impacts, lack of impacts, potential impacts, whatever the phrase I was supposed to use for that. That all gets wrapped up into a document that helps us understand what these ultimate costs would be. At the beginning, I asked you, if you would, to fill out a comment questionnaire. If there's anything here that we've talked to you about tonight that stirs you to say, gee, how would you do this? Would you mind doing that? Would you consider incorporating this? This is the time for you to bring that up, and so we can still incorporate them into our study documents and incorporate your thoughts and your concerns into the improvements. So we got different ways to do it. You can leave the document with us. You can email it to us. We just ask that we get comments by February 28th. We're putting a deadline on it just simply so we can move forward and make certain that your comments are addressed.